Ethan Moretti was the kind of man who seemed to have everything anyone could ever dream of. Young, incredibly handsome, and heir to a vast fortune, he lived surrounded by luxury, elegance, and influence. His name appeared in business magazines, his photos in society pages, and his lifestyle was both admired and envied by many. Yet, behind the tailored suits, the charming smile, and the golden watches, hid something far less admirable, a cold and merciless arrogance. Ethan had the habit of treating people with disdain, especially those who worked for him. His employees lived in constant fear of his temper, always on edge, afraid of his harsh criticism and humiliating remarks. He believed that wealth and beauty placed him above everyone else, and anyone outside his world of privilege was invisible to him. Among all his employees, there was one person in particular who often became the target of his cruelty: Clara, the cleaning lady. Clara was a simple, quiet woman, always polite and discreet. She spoke with a soft Italian accent that made her words sound melodic. Few people knew much about her past. All they knew was that she had come from Italy years ago and now worked to support her family. Ethan rarely spoke to her, and when he did, it was usually to complain. "Clara," he would say coldly, "you missed a spot on the marble again. It's incredible how someone who does this every day can still get it wrong." She never argued. She simply lowered her head and replied softly, "Yes, sir. I'll take care of it right away." But what no one, not even Ethan, knew was that Clara carried a secret about her past. Before coming to work as a cleaner, she had lived a completely different life. In Tuscany, she had worked in a renowned vineyard where she had been trained as a sommelier, an expert in fine wines. She could identify the year, aroma, and even the soil of a wine's origin with just a sip. However, life had been unkind to her. After losing her husband and facing financial hardship, Clara decided to leave everything behind and start over in another country, carrying nothing but courage and a knowledge no one around her suspected she possessed. One morning, Ethan proudly announced that he would be hosting the most extravagant party of the year at his mansion. The event would gather powerful businessmen, influential politicians, and famous celebrities. Nothing could go wrong. Every detail had to reflect his image of perfection and status. He hired one of the most famous sommeliers in the region, known for serving wines at royal family banquets. Everything was planned for an unforgettable night, but fate, as always, had its own plans. Just hours before the event, Ethan received a shocking phone call. The sommelier had been in a car accident. Though he was safe, he wouldn't make it to the party. Panic spread through the mansion. The ballroom was ready, the guests were on their way, and no one knew the first thing about serving the cheap, rare, expensive wines waiting in the cellar. Ethan stormed around, furious. "Does anyone here know anything about wine?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. "Anyone?" Silence. No one dared to answer, until from a quiet corner of the kitchen, a calm voice spoke up. "I might be able to help, sir." Ethan turned sharply, surprised. It was Clara. He frowned, both shocked and amused. "You?" he said incredulously. "You're a cleaning lady, not a wine expert. What could you possibly know about that?" Clara took a deep breath and replied gently, with a faint smile, "Perhaps more than you imagine, Mr. Moretti." The other servants looked at each other in disbelief. Ethan laughed sarcastically. "Very well then, since you seem so confident, you'll be responsible for serving the wine tonight. Let's see what a cleaning lady can do in front of the city's elite." And with that cruel challenge, Ethan unknowingly set the stage for his own humiliation. That evening, as the mansion lights gleamed and luxury cars began arriving, something extraordinary was about to unfold. A night when fate would reverse the roles, and a humble cleaning lady would teach a powerful man the true value of humility, knowledge, and grace born of experience. As the golden sunset dipped behind the city skyline, Ethan Moretti's mansion came alive like a palace in a modern fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers bathed the marble floors in soft light, and a faint scent of white roses filled the air. Dozens of servers rushed about, placing the last touches on tables decorated with silver and fine porcelain. Everything sparkled. Every corner screamed luxury. Ethan stood at the grand staircase, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit, his confidence restored despite the earlier chaos. He looked at himself in the mirror one last time, adjusting his cufflinks. "Perfect," he whispered to his reflection, convinced that the night would once again prove his power and social dominance. But beneath all that perfection, a subtle unease lingered. The sommelier's absence still haunted him. What if the wine service, one of the most anticipated parts of the evening, turned into a disaster? He glanced at the kitchen, where Clara, dressed in a simple black uniform, was nervously polishing crystal glasses. Ethan's eyes narrowed in disdain. He muttered under his breath, "What a ridiculous idea, letting the cleaning lady handle my wines. If she embarrasses me in front of these people, I'll make sure she never works in this city again." Soon the grand doors opened and the first guests arrived. Luxury cars lined the driveway, and the air filled with laughter, greetings, and the faint clinking of champagne glasses. Businessmen in expensive suits, politicians with their elegant wives, and even a famous film director entered the mansion, exchanging compliments about the decor and the atmosphere. "Ethan, my boy," said Mr. Delacroix, an old family friend and wine enthusiast, clapping him on the shoulder. "I hear you've managed to get your hands on a 1990 Chateau Margaux. Now that is a statement." Ethan forced a confident smile. "Of course, only the best for my guests." But inside, he was sweating. The Chateau Margaux, one of the most prestigious wines in the world, was precisely the bottle that would need to be served flawlessly. Every detail mattered: the temperature, the way it was opened, the decanting process, the glass, everything. And the only person left to handle that ritual was Clara. When the moment arrived, the music softened, and the guests gathered near the grand table, curious and eager for the wine service. Ethan cleared his throat, ready to introduce what he thought would be a disaster, one that might even turn amusing for his high society friends. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began with a smug tone, "our sommelier unfortunately could not be here tonight, but don't worry. One of my staff members has kindly volunteered to take his place." He turned slightly, eyes glinting with irony. "Clara, would you please step forward?" A murmur spread through the room. Guests exchanged puzzled looks. A cleaning lady serving wine at such a prestigious event. Some giggled quietly. Others looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to take it as a joke. Clara approached the table with grace, her expression calm and confident. Though her uniform was plain, there was something dignified in her movements, something almost regal. She gently took the bottle of Chateau Margaux, examined the label, and smiled subtly as if greeting an old friend. "Ah, the 1990 vintage," she said softly, her Italian accent lilting. "A beautiful year in Bordeaux. The season was warm but not harsh, and the harvest came early. You can already imagine the depth of the tannins and the balance of its bouquet." The room fell silent. Ethan's smile froze. Mr. Delacroix, the wine expert, leaned forward, intrigued. Clara continued, her hands moving with elegance as she carefully removed the cork. "You'll notice its color, a deep ruby with touches of garnet. That's the mark of age and character. Before serving, it deserves to breathe, to awaken its essence after years of rest." She poured the wine into a crystal decanter, her every motion precise, graceful, practiced. The guests watched in awe. She swirled the decanter gently, then served a small portion for tasting. Instead of handing it to Ethan, she offered it to Mr. Delacroix. "Please," she said, "tell us what you feel on the nose." He inhaled deeply, then smiled with visible surprise. "Magnificent. Notes of black currant, truffle, and cedar. Perfectly described." Clara nodded respectfully. "And on the palate, you'll find a long finish. Earthy, elegant, with the slightest whisper of tobacco. A wine that asks for silence when it's tasted." The entire room went still. Even the music seemed to fade. For a long moment, the only sound was the gentle swirl of wine in the glass. Then, a round of applause erupted. Guests exchanged astonished glances. Someone whispered, "Who is she?" Another murmured, "She speaks like she's lived in the vineyards all her life." Ethan stood frozen, his face pale. What had started as a cruel joke had turned into his own public humiliation. Clara had not only outshone his arrogance, she had captivated every person in the room. And just when the admiration reached its peak, Mr. Delacroix looked at her with a spark of recognition. "Wait a moment. Clara Bianchi? From, Tenuta di Monteluce, Tuscany." A soft smile curved her lips. "Once upon a time, yes. But life has a way of taking us down unexpected paths, doesn't it?" Gasps filled the air. Tenuta di Monteluce was one of the most respected wineries in Italy. Clara had once been one of their lead sommeliers, a legend in her field. Ethan's world crumbled around him. His guests, who had once hung on his every word, now looked at Clara with admiration and respect, and at him with thinly veiled contempt. In that moment, the balance of power had shifted completely. The millionaire had been silenced by the very person he once belittled. The applause that followed Clara's tasting demonstration seemed to echo endlessly through the marble halls of Ethan Moretti's mansion. The sound was sharp, powerful, and strangely haunting, like the applause of fate itself. Every clap felt like a verdict against the man who had built his world on arrogance and pride. Ethan stood stiffly near the head of the table, his jaw tight, his face pale. His smile, once the perfect mask of confidence, had vanished entirely. He could feel every gaze in the room turning toward Clara, not with pity or amusement, but with admiration. The woman he had mocked, the one he had called just a cleaning lady, was now the center of attention, her presence radiating grace and quiet power. Clara, for her part, did not bask in their praise. She moved with humble dignity, acknowledging the guests with a modest smile, as though unaware of the magnitude of what she had just done. When she spoke, her voice was steady and calm, filled with a soft Italian warmth that wrapped around everyone listening. "Wine," she said gently, "is a mirror of life. It needs time to breathe, to mature, to find its true essence. Just like people, sometimes we judge too soon. We taste before the soul has had time to open." Her words fell like poetry into the silence. A few guests exchanged looks, moved by the depth of her metaphor. Some even felt a sting of guilt, realizing that they too had silently laughed at her just moments before. One of the businessmen, an older gentleman with silver hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward, fascinated. "Ms. Clara," he said, "your knowledge is remarkable. You speak of wine as though you were born among the vines." Clara gave a soft nod. "In a way I was. My father worked the vineyards in Tuscany. I learned to tell the seasons by the scent of the soil. For me, wine has always been a language, one that speaks of patience, care, and respect for what grows beneath our feet." Her voice trembled slightly at the word respect, and though she didn't look at Ethan, everyone felt the unspoken weight of her statement. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. Mr. Delacroix, the wine connoisseur, raised his glass toward her. "You, my dear, have a gift, one that no title or fortune can buy. It's rare to meet someone who understands the soul of a wine, not just its taste." The guests murmured in agreement, their admiration growing with each passing second. A woman in an emerald gown turned to Ethan, smirking faintly. "Ethan, where on earth did you find such talent in your staff? You must have a keen eye for excellence." Her tone was teasing, but her eyes sparkled with irony. The crowd chuckled softly. Ethan forced a strained laugh, but inside, his heart pounded with shame. For the first time in his life, he felt small. The party continued, but the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The guests no longer clustered around Ethan. Instead, they gravitated toward Clara. She spoke with effortless charm, answering questions about vintages, regions, and pairings, weaving stories of Italy, of olive groves, rolling hills, and the fragrance of crushed grapes under the autumn sun. At one point, she lifted her glass and said softly, "Wine is not about status. It is about connection. It brings people together, no matter their titles or their wealth. That is its true beauty." There was a silence after her words, a silence not of emptiness, but of reverence. Even the faint background music seemed to fade, as though the house itself was listening. Then came the moment that changed everything. The silver-haired businessman, Mr. Riccardo Venturi, owner of one of Europe's largest luxury restaurants, stepped forward. "Clara," he said firmly, his voice filled with genuine admiration, "I would be honored to have you on my team. A woman with your knowledge and humility belongs in a place where people can appreciate your art. I have restaurants in Rome, Paris, and New York, and I think your talent deserves the world." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Clara froze, stunned. Her hands trembled slightly, and for the first time that night, tears welled up in her eyes. "Signore Venturi," she whispered, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he replied warmly. "People like you remind us what true passion means." The guests burst into applause again, louder this time, more heartfelt. Even those who had arrived with arrogance in their hearts now clapped with genuine admiration. It was a moment of triumph, not just for Clara, but for every humble soul who had ever been underestimated. Ethan felt his throat tighten. The sound of their applause, once a comfort to his ego, now pierced him like a knife. His chest ached with something unfamiliar, not anger, but regret. He suddenly saw, with painful clarity, the emptiness of his life, the house, the money, the parties. None of it had meaning without respect, without humility, without humanity. When the applause faded, Ethan slowly approached Clara. The room quieted instantly, sensing the tension between them. He looked at her for a long moment, the woman he had humiliated so many times, now standing before him with quiet dignity and grace. Then, with a heavy voice, he said, "Clara, I owe you an apology. I treated you unfairly. Tonight you've reminded me, and everyone here, what true worth looks like. I was blind and you opened my eyes." Clara studied him for a moment, her expression kind but firm. "We all learn, Mr. Moretti," she said gently. "Some lessons just take longer than others." Her forgiveness was simple, but it struck deeper than any punishment could. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. For the first time in years, his arrogance crumbled, replaced by something pure and unfamiliar: humility. The guests looked on, moved by the transformation unfolding before them. What had begun as an evening of pride and showmanship had turned into a lesson in humanity, a reminder that true class does not come from wealth or beauty, but from respect, compassion, and grace. As the night came to an end, Clara stood by the window, watching the stars reflect in her glass of wine. She thought of her father, of Tuscany, of the long road that had brought her here. Life, she realized, had its own way of restoring balance. Ethan, standing quietly nearby, raised his glass toward her. "To new beginnings," he said softly. She turned, smiled, and lifted her glass in return. "To lessons learned." And with that, the arrogant millionaire and the humble sommelier shared a silent toast, not of status, but of redemption. It was the night when pride bowed before grace, and a forgotten woman reminded the world that true elegance begins with the heart. The night had ended, but its echo lingered in the air long after the last car had disappeared down the grand driveway of Ethan Moretti's mansion. The house, once filled with laughter and music, now stood in a strange, almost sacred silence. The glittering chandeliers still glowed softly, casting reflections on the marble floor, reflections of a night that had changed everything. Ethan sat alone in the main hall, a half-empty glass of wine trembling slightly in his hand. The same Chateau Margaux that Clara had served so elegantly hours earlier now tasted different, not because of its flavor, but because of what it, represented. Every sip carried a memory, a sting of humility, and a question that wouldn't leave his mind. How could I have been so blind? The mansion felt emptier than ever. The servants had gone to their quarters, and the guests, the very people he had tried so hard to impress, had left speaking not of his wealth or his style, but of her, Clara, the cleaning lady who had turned into the star of the evening. He replayed every moment in his head, her steady voice, her confidence, her quiet strength, and that moment when she forgave him, not with bitterness or pride, but with a simple truth: we all learn. Some lessons just take longer than others. Those words echoed through him like a prayer. For the first time in years, Ethan felt small, not in a degrading way, but in a way that made him realize how vast the world truly was beyond his own ego. He thought of all the people he had dismissed, the employees he had humiliated, the opportunities for kindness he had wasted. In the mirror on the far wall, he saw not the powerful businessman everyone admired, but a lonely man, one who had mistaken arrogance for strength. The next morning, the mansion was quiet. The usual chatter of servants was replaced by a soft, uneasy silence. No one quite knew how to act around their employer after what had happened the previous night. When Clara arrived early for work, she expected tension, maybe even dismissal. After all, she had become the talk of the night. But to her surprise, Ethan was already waiting in the main hall. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed by the weight of reflection. "Clara," he said simply, "thank you for coming." She nodded politely. "Of course, sir, it's my job." Ethan hesitated, then shook his head. "No, not anymore. You don't work for me. Not in that way. You deserve far better than to scrub floors in this house." Clara blinked, unsure how to respond. "I'm not ashamed of honest work," she said quietly. "Cleaning has dignity, too." Ethan's gaze softened. "I know that now," he replied, "but last night showed me something I've been too proud to see. You carry a kind of grace I've never known, the kind that comes from humility and strength, not money." He gestured toward a small envelope on the table. "That's your recommendation letter. I spoke with Mr. Venturi this morning. He wants you to join his restaurant in Paris immediately. I told him you deserve it." Clara stared at the envelope, speechless. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "You didn't have to do this." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but for once I wanted to do the right thing." She took the letter slowly, her fingers trembling. "Thank you, Mr. Moretti," she said softly. He looked at her for a long moment. "Please, call me Ethan." That simple request broke the invisible wall between them. For the first time, they were not master and servant, just two people, both changed by the same lesson. As the days passed, Clara prepared to leave. For Paris. The staff gathered to say goodbye, their eyes filled with admiration and sadness. She had become more than just a colleague. She was a symbol of quiet courage, a reminder that dignity cannot be erased by circumstance. On her last day, Ethan asked to drive her to the airport himself. It was a gesture that stunned everyone, but he insisted. The drive was quiet at first. The city rolled by in golden morning light, and neither spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "You know," he began, "I used to think success was about power, about having people look up to me." He paused. "But now I realize, it's about how many people you can lift with you." Clara smiled, looking out the window. "Then you've already taken your first step, Ethan." He glanced at her. "And you? What will you do now?" Her eyes lit up. "I'll start over. I'll work with wines again, teach others what I've learned, and maybe one day open a small vineyard of my own, a place where people are treated with respect, no matter who they are." Ethan's heart tightened at her words. "That sounds beautiful." They reached the airport, and when she stepped out of the car, he followed. For a moment they stood facing each other, two souls connected by a strange twist of fate. "Clara," he said softly, "thank you. You've changed more than just one evening. You've changed me." She looked at him kindly. "Sometimes," she said, "life humbles us not to break us, but to open our eyes. Don't forget that." With that, she turned and walked away, her simple suitcase in hand. Her figure grew smaller as she disappeared into the crowd, but her presence lingered in Ethan's heart like a melody that never fades. As her plane lifted into the sky, Ethan stood at the window, watching until it vanished among the clouds. He didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of his own journey toward redemption. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's transformation became evident. He treated his staff with kindness, spoke with humility, and listened more than he talked. The mansion, once a place of vanity, began to feel alive again, filled not with fear, but with warmth. And though he never saw Clara again in person, her words stayed with him, guiding him like a quiet compass through every decision he made. Every time he poured himself a glass of wine, he would pause, close his eyes, and whisper, "To lessons learned, and to those who teach them." That night, the night of the party, the humiliation and the revelation, had become the turning point of his life. The night when a cleaning lady became a queen and a millionaire became human. And somewhere in Paris, under the glow of soft lights and the scent of aged oak barrels, Clara smiled as she lifted a glass of wine, knowing that sometimes the greatest victories are not shouted from the rooftops, but whispered quietly between hearts that have truly changed. Paris, the city of lights, of dreams, of second chances. As Clara stepped out of the Charles de Gaulle airport, a cool breeze brushed her face, carrying with it the scent of roasted chestnuts, fresh bread, and the distant sound of violin music. The horizon shimmered with promise. For the first time in many years, she wasn't cleaning up someone else's world. She was stepping into her own. Mr. Venturi's restaurant, Le Coeur du Vin, sat quietly on a narrow cobblestone street near Montmartre. It wasn't the biggest or most luxurious restaurant in Paris, but it was respected, deeply respected, known among wine enthusiasts as a sanctuary for those who understood that wine was not merely a drink, but a story told in flavor, time, and patience. When Clara arrived for her first day, she wore a simple black dress and tied her hair back. The other employees greeted her warmly, though a few seemed skeptical. After all, News about her had spread fast. The cleaning lady who humbled a millionaire. Some believed the story, others dismissed it as exaggerated gossip. But Clara didn't care. She wasn't there to prove anyone wrong. She was there to begin again. Mr. Venturi, a tall Italian man with kind eyes and a salt and pepper beard, welcomed her with genuine warmth. "Clara," he said, "I've heard extraordinary things about you. Here, we don't care about titles or background. We care about passion. And you, my dear, have that in abundance." His words filled her with a quiet strength. It was the validation she had never sought but always needed. Her first weeks were intense. She studied the restaurant's vast wine cellar, hundreds of bottles from France, Italy, Spain, and beyond. She memorized vintages, learned the preferences of regular customers, and refined her craft. Every cork she pulled, every glass she poured, carried intention and respect. It wasn't just about serving wine. It was about creating a moment, an emotion. The staff began to notice her precision, her grace under pressure, her ability to turn even the simplest table service into an experience. She spoke with guests not as a servant but as a storyteller, weaving history and culture into each recommendation. Soon people began to ask specifically for her, the Italian woman with the poetic voice. Weeks turned into months, and Clara's reputation grew. Wine critics began to take note, writing about her unique approach to pairing and her instinctive understanding of balance and flavor. She became known as la femme au sein du vin, the woman with the senses of wine. But, despite her rising fame, Clara never let pride take root. She still arrived early each morning, cleaning the counter herself, arranging glasses, and checking every bottle personally. The memory of her years as a cleaning lady grounded her. She knew that greatness wasn't found in grand gestures, but in the quiet devotion to what one loves. Sometimes, late at night, after the restaurant had closed, Clara would sit alone at one of the corner tables. She would pour herself a small glass of red wine and gaze out the window at the flickering lights of Paris. In those moments, she thought of Ethan Moretti, the man who had once mocked her and who had also, in an unexpected twist of fate, opened the door to this new chapter of her life. She didn't hate him anymore. In fact, she felt something close to gratitude. He had been her mirror, a reflection of what pride can do to a soul, and how easily people forget that true worth cannot be measured in wealth or titles. Yet, part of her still wondered what had become of him. Had he truly changed? Or was that night just a passing embarrassment for a proud man? One evening, after a particularly busy service, Clara was called into Mr. Venturi's office. He was seated at his desk, reading a letter. When she entered, he looked up with a smile. "Clara," he said, "you've been with us only a few months, but your name is already spreading across Paris. I've received an invitation from the Maison de la Sommellerie Française. They're hosting a prestigious wine exhibition, the most important of the year. They've asked you to represent our restaurant." Clara's eyes widened. "Me? But there must be so many others." He raised a hand gently. "Yes, there are many, but none with your gift. You don't just serve wine. You make people feel something. That's what they want. You've earned this." She sat down, her heart racing. The Maison de la Sommellerie Française, the house of French sommelier, was the dream of every wine expert. The event gathered the best from around the world, the elite of the elite, and now she was invited to stand among them. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She walked through the quiet streets of Paris, the moon reflecting on the Seine like silver silk. She thought about her journey, from scrubbing marble floors in a mansion where she was invisible, to standing on the threshold of recognition in one of the most refined circles of Europe. But with her excitement came nerves. What if she failed? What if she wasn't enough? Those thoughts lingered in the corners of her mind like shadows. Still, deep inside, she knew that this was her destiny. Life had taken her through the mud, not to bury her, but to prepare her roots. The following days were filled with preparation. She studied rare vintages, practiced blind tastings, and refined her presentation. The restaurant staff cheered her on, proud to see one of their own reaching such heights. And then came the day of the exhibition. The grand hall of the Maison de la Sommellerie gleamed with golden chandeliers and polished oak tables. Sommeliers from Italy, France, Spain, and even California were present, each representing their countries with pride. The air was filled with the soft aroma of oak barrels and aged grapes, a perfume that only those who truly loved wine could appreciate. As Clara entered, dressed elegantly in a dark burgundy gown, conversations hushed for a moment. People turned to look at her, recognizing the woman whose story had traveled quietly through the industry. Some smiled with admiration, others with curiosity. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was not about proving her worth to anyone. This was about honoring the journey that had brought her here. Every tear, every humiliation, every act of resilience. She moved gracefully among the tables, examining bottles, answering questions, sharing insights with quiet authority. Her Italian accent gave her words a musical softness that charmed everyone who listened. When it was her turn to present, she stood before the judges and began her explanation, not with technical jargon, but with emotion. "Wine," she said softly, "is like life. It begins humble, just a fruit, small and unremarkable. But time, patience, and care transform it into something beautiful. Every bottle tells a story of struggle, of sunlight, of rain, of waiting, just like us." Her voice carried through the hall like poetry. By the time she finished, the room was silent. The kind of silence that comes from admiration, not indifference. When the applause came, it was thunderous. And somewhere in that audience, though she didn't know it yet, a familiar face was watching. A man who had once stood at the top of the world, only to fall into the depths of his own pride, now risen again, searching for redemption. It was Ethan Moretti. He hadn't come for fame, nor out of curiosity. He had come because he had read her name on the program list. Clara Rossi, representing Lyon, Coeur du Vin. His heart had raced the moment he saw it, and now, seeing her standing there, poised, radiant, and respected, he realized that the woman he had once underestimated had become everything he had once pretended to be. He didn't approach her that night, not yet. He simply watched from a distance, a quiet smile on his face, and whispered to himself, "She found her place in the world." And as Clara accepted the applause with grace, unaware of his presence, the universe seemed to pause, as if holding its breath for what was yet to come. The applause echoed through the grand hall like a wave, wrapping Clara in a moment of disbelief and gratitude. She bowed slightly, her heart racing with emotion. For years she had lived in silence, forgotten by the world, and now here she was, standing before an audience of the most respected sommeliers in Europe, being celebrated not for who she had served, but for who she had become. The lights dimmed softly as the judges moved on to the next presentation, but Clara's thoughts were far away. She excused herself politely and stepped out into the long marble corridor, the hum of voices fading behind her. Her hands trembled slightly as she leaned against the cool stone wall, trying to steady her breathing. The weight of her journey pressed against her chest, the losses, the humiliation, the quiet nights of cleaning floors and wiping tables, and now, all of that seemed like another lifetime. Outside the tall glass doors, Paris glowed beneath a crescent moon. Carriages of light moved through the streets, laughter spilling from nearby cafes, music drifting softly from a violinist playing by the fountain. She watched silently, her eyes glistening. What she didn't know was that Ethan Moretti had followed her. He stood a few meters away, watching her from the shadow of a column. He looked very different now. The tailored arrogance was gone. His once perfectly styled hair was now slightly unkempt, and the hard edge in his eyes had softened. He wasn't the same man who had laughed at her, who had humiliated her in front of his guests. The fall from grace had changed him. After that fateful night in his mansion, his reputation had crumbled faster than he could control. Word had spread through the social circles, how the proud millionaire had been publicly humbled by his own cleaning lady. Investors withdrew, business partners distanced themselves, and for the first time, Ethan faced the silence of those who once praised him. He had sold the mansion not long after, unable to bear walking through its halls, the marble floors, the chandeliers, the ghost of his own arrogance. He had traveled aimlessly through Europe, trying to find meaning beyond the mirrors of luxury that once defined him. And then, one morning in Florence, while sipping coffee in a small cafe, he saw a headline in a local magazine, "The Italian maid who became Paris's rising star sommelier." The photo beneath the title showed Clara, smiling, confident, elegant. Something stirred in him, a mixture of admiration and remorse. He realized that while he had fallen because of pride, She had risen because of grace. And so, he came to Paris, not to reclaim anything, not to ask for forgiveness, but to witness with his own eyes the strength of the woman he had once dismissed. Now, standing there in the marble corridor, he hesitated. His instinct told him to turn around, to leave quietly. What right did he have to speak to her after everything? But something deeper urged him forward, the kind of pull that comes when fate demands unfinished words to finally be spoken. He took a cautious step forward. His voice, when it came, was quiet and trembling. Clara. She froze. The name, spoken in that voice, it was unmistakable. Slowly, she turned around. Her eyes widened in shock as she saw him standing there, a shadow from the past now looking strangely human, almost fragile. Ethan, she whispered. Her mind raced, flooded with the memory of humiliation, of pain, of anger, but also with a strange sense of closure. She hadn't expected to ever see him again. He nodded, his gaze falling to the floor. I didn't mean to startle you. His voice faltered. I wanted to see you, to tell you that I saw everything tonight. Your presentation, the way you spoke. You were extraordinary. Clara didn't speak at first. Her eyes searched his face. The man who once exuded control and dominance now stood before her, humbled, uncertain, sincere. You came all the way here? For that? She finally asked, her voice calm but guarded. He took another step closer. I came because I needed to, because there's something I should have said a long time ago. He hesitated, as though the words themselves were heavy. You changed me, Clara. That night, when you stood in front of everyone and spoke about wine, about humility, I saw myself for who I truly was. I thought I was powerful, but I was just empty. Clara crossed her arms gently, studying him. And what did you find in the emptiness, Ethan? He smiled faintly, a sad, tired smile. Myself, I think. The part I had buried under money and pride. I lost everything. My business, my so-called friends, my status. But maybe I needed to lose it all to understand what truly matters. The corridor was quiet except for the distant echo of laughter from the hall. For a long moment they simply looked at each other. Two people bound not by romance, but by a shared history that had tested and changed them both. Ethan's eyes softened. I never said thank you, he murmured. You showed me what dignity looks like, what strength really is. You didn't need revenge or anger. You just stood tall. I'll never forget that. Clara lowered her gaze. There was a strange peace in her heart. The anger she once carried had long faded, replaced by understanding. She had spent years learning that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about freeing yourself from the weight of resentment. You don't need to thank me, she said quietly. Life teaches us all, one way or another. It taught you through loss, and it taught me through silence. He nodded slowly. I know, but still, I'm sorry. The words hung in the air between them, raw and unpolished, but real. Clara turned back toward the glass doors, her reflection shimmering against the Parisian night. It's strange, she said softly, how life circles back. Once, you were the man on top of the world, and I was invisible. Now we stand as equals, not because one fell and the other rose, but because both of us learned to see. Ethan's throat tightened. You're right, he whispered, and maybe that's the real lesson life wanted to teach me. She looked at him again, not with anger, not even with pity, but with quiet compassion. Maybe, she said, the lesson was for both of us. The faint sound of applause echoed again from the hall, signaling the end of the ceremony. Clara turned slightly toward the sound, and Ethan took it as a sign to leave. But before he did, he spoke one last time. I don't expect forgiveness, Clara, but if I could, I'd like to believe that maybe someday you could think of me not as the man who hurt you, but as someone who finally learned. Clara gave a small, thoughtful smile. People can change, Ethan. I've seen it happen. The question is, will you continue to? He met her gaze, and for a moment, the arrogance that once defined him was completely gone. Only sincerity remained. I'll try, he said simply. And with that, he turned and began to walk down the corridor, his footsteps fading into the distance. Clara stood still, watching him leave, her heart calm yet stirred by something she couldn't quite name. Outside, the Parisian night awaited them both, two souls forever marked by a single evening years ago, now finding their way through the light and shadow of redemption. She looked back through the glass doors at the glittering hall. The Laughter, the champagne, the life she had built. A deep breath filled her lungs. She had come so far, but somehow she knew her story, and perhaps Ethan's too, was far from over.